Have you ever heard that a single decision can change the course of a life? Now imagine a battle capable of altering the destiny of the entire world. Most people think that World War II was decided on the beaches of Normandy or in the trenches of France. But what if I told you that the true turning point happened even before that, amid the frozen ruins of a city called Stalingrad? This battle wasn't just brutal, it was personal. It was a battle of egos between two tyrants. Hitler, obsessed with domination, and Stalin, willing to do anything to defend the land that bore his name. A confrontation where every street turned into a battlefield, and every loaf of bread became a matter of life or death. It sounds like a movie, but it was real. And the price was paid in blood, sweat, and piercing cold. For months, the eyes of the world were fixed on that forgotten piece of the map. A city in ruins, yet with immense strategic value. Hitler craved oil, power, and propaganda. Stalin wanted to resist, even if it meant fighting tooth and nail. And what happened there? My friend, went so far beyond military logic that even today historians are left speechless. A cruel, unexpected twist, and absolutely decisive. In this video, you'll dive into the heart of a battle that blended brilliant strategy, outrageous mistakes, and unimaginable courage. You'll understand why Stalingrad became the symbol of resistance, the beginning of the end for the Third Reich, and an eternal warning about the dangers of arrogance on the battlefield. So buckle up, because what you're about to see is going to completely change your view of World War II. Have you ever stopped to think about why, in the midst of a war that was already a never-ending pandemonium, Hitler made sure to put Stalingrad in the spotlight? It wasn't just because of the name, even though it was a goldmine for an ego on fire. Attacking a city named after Stalin was like sending a giant provocation note. But there was much more at stake. The Volga River flowed right there, a vital artery for Soviet transportation, and further south lay the oil fields of the Caucasus, which Hitler desired as desperately as someone needs oxygen. Capturing Stalingrad promised to strangle the Soviet Union from within. Hitler's obsession with the Caucasus oil wasn't a flight of fancy, it was a matter of survival. Without fuel, German tanks would be nothing but rolling scrap metal. The problem, he wanted to do everything at once, advance toward the oil fields and, on top of that, take Stalingrad as his personal trophy. But by dividing his forces, he started, stitching together his own trap. And when you try to take on two giants with nothing but a slingshot, it never ends well. The city became the symbol of a bet that was far too high and horribly miscalculated. On the other hand, for Stalin, losing Stalingrad was unthinkable. It was a matter of honor, of morale, of ideological survival. It wasn't just about territory, it was about resisting public humiliation. Stalin knew that if that city fell, Soviet morale would plummet along with it. So he did what had to be done. He turned every street, every building, every brick of the city into a line of defense. And when an entire people decide that they won't give an inch, history begins to shift. The curious part is that, on paper, the German strategy even made sense. Advance from the south, secure energy, cut off supplies. It was like shutting off a faucet that was feeding the enemy. But war isn't fought on paper alone, right? There's mud, there's cold, human error and arrogance. And when logic gives way to vanity, plans crumble. Hitler wanted to beat Stalin on his own turf, in the city that bore his name. But by trying to turn a strategic battle into a duel of egos, he sealed the fate of his own army, and that's precisely when things began to take unimaginable proportions. Because Stalingrad wasn't just a dot on the map, it turned into an unprecedented slaughterhouse, a nightmare that would last for months, consume dozens of divisions, and forever change the course of World War II. Imagine hell taking shape on a map, with a name, an address, and a marked date. Stalingrad, August 1942. What started as a strategic offensive turned into a spectacle of unbridled destruction. On the very first day, August 23rd, the Luftwaffe rained fire down on the city. Thousands of bombs turned avenues into craters, factories into ruins, and homes into ashes. But instead of clearing the way for victory, the rubble became makeshift trenches. Stalin and Hitler had entered an all-or-nothing game, and no one there seemed willing to back down. What followed was a drawn-out and insane urban combat, as if every corner of Stalingrad had to be won with blood. It was no longer conventional warfare. It was personal. Houses, schools, sewers, building stairwells. Every nook and cranny turned into a battleground. The sound of gunfire was relentless. It was a macabre symphony playing day and night, without pause, without mercy. Soldiers fought with knives, shovels, or even with their bare hands. Anyone who stepped into Stalingrad already knew the odds of making it out alive were slim. In 6 months of battle, over 2 million people were involved, and more than 1 million never made it home. It was war in its rawest, most primitive form. Bitter cold, constant hunger, bodies serving as cover during clashes. The ground froze, but the hatred burned on. And even amidst the chaos, nobody retreated. Hitler insisted on taking the city at all costs. Stalin, on his part, ordered that not an inch be surrendered. It was as if the two had signed an unspoken pact of self-destruction. While the Germans advanced street by street, the Soviets dug deeper into the ruins. There was no clear front line. The enemy could be upstairs, in a basement, or lurking behind a shattered door. The fighting was so close range that heavy artillery lost its effectiveness. Every meter gained cost dozens, sometimes hundreds, of lives. But the city held on like a ghost refusing to die. And the more blood that was shed, the more Stalingrad ceased to be merely a city. It transformed into a symbol of something greater. And when symbols come to life amid the flames, something awakens within people. Something that goes beyond military logic or mere survival. Something that begins to morph into legend. And in the upcoming scenes of this hellish drama, the Soviet resistance will show the world what it truly means to fight with heart and soul. If there's one thing this war taught us, it's that underestimating the spirit of a people can be the gravest mistake of all. In Stalingrad, the Soviet Union wasn't just fighting with tanks and rifles, it was fighting with every beat of its heart. Led by the relentless general Vasily Chuikov, the city's defenders weren't there by choice, but by conviction. The order was clear, direct, and left no room for interpretation, not one step back. And it wasn't just a catchphrase, it was state policy, literally. Anyone who retreated risked death at the hands of their own army. And let me tell you, there was no shortage of courage. From high command to the lowest laborer, everyone knew that more was at stake than just territory. Khrushchev and Yeremenko played key roles behind the scenes, holding the political and strategic reins amidst the chaos. And Stalin, all the way from the Kremlin, kept his eyes locked on the city that bore his name. He knew the world was watching. He knew that a failure at Stalingrad wouldn't just be a military defeat, but a moral collapse for the entire Soviet regime. But the most impressive part was witnessing who rose up to fight. They weren't just trained soldiers. There were blacksmiths, students, peasants, homemakers, women picking up arms, kids with still childlike faces carrying ammunition. It was as if the entire city had transformed into one unified body, breathing, resisting, and fighting tooth and nail. With every German advance, another group of civilians emerged, determined to keep the soul of Stalingrad alive. And Chuikov, with his close-quarters combat strategy, forced the Germans to fight in conditions that nullified their superiority. No more surgical airstrikes. Instead, it was raw, knife-to-knife combat. He turned the city into a deadly maze, where fear shifted at every corner. The motto was simple: The closer you get to the enemy, the less effective the German firepower becomes. And so, meter by meter, the Soviets weathered the storm, and they held on, in the most unexpected way possible. Because when everyone thought the city would fall, something began to change. A silent, almost invisible turnaround at first. But soon, it transformed into a red storm. And then, my friend, came a masterstroke that would change everything. That's when the Soviets, with the cool-headedness of a seasoned chess player, played their boldest move yet, Operation Uranus. The idea was as simple as it was brilliant, to attack where the enemy was weakest. While Hitler placed all his chips in the center of the city, Stalin and his top brass were orchestrating a devastating pincer movement, targeting the weaker, poorly equipped German flanks. A masterstroke that would not soon be forgotten. On November 19, 1942, the grey skies over the steppe trembled with the roar of over 800,000 marching Soviet soldiers. It was a colossal force, coming in from two sides, advancing with a terrifying speed. The Romanians, poor souls, hardly knew what hit them. In just a few days, the Soviets broke through the lateral defenses and advanced until they met behind the German lines. The encirclement was complete. The famous cauldron of Stalingrad had just been closed, and inside it, Hitler's 6th Division was frying. General Paulus, surrounded by over 250,000 men, found himself trapped. Literally, cut off from supplies. With the cold tightening its grip and the enemy closing in every hour, he asked for permission to retreat. But Hitler, in a mix of stubbornness and delusion, refused. He ordered them to resist. He ordered them to die if necessary. For him, yielding Stalingrad would mean admitting weakness. And admitting weakness wasn't in the Third Reich's vocabulary. The result? The noose tightened, and despair became routine inside that frozen cauldron. Meanwhile, on the Soviet side, the mood was different. Not one of euphoria, but of focus. There was still much to be done, and Zhukov knew that even though the enemy was encircled, they could still wreak havoc. But now, it was only a matter of time. The German supply lines were cut off. The Russian artillery pounded day and night. Every escape attempt was met with swift, decisive action. The city held on, and the encirclement tightened. The chess game was nearing its end, but checkmate was still on the horizon. It was amid this atmosphere of impending collapse that the signs began to appear. Hunger, cold, exhaustion. And worst of all, the absence of any real rescue plan. What followed was a stark portrait of ruin, a true logistical and human implosion that would show, once and for all, that the Nazi war machine was far from invincible. And then, my friend, the empire started to crack. When food turns to crumbs and ammunition becomes a luxury, even the most disciplined army in the world feels the blow. Inside Stalingrad, Hitler's 6th Division was encircled, isolated, and at the mercy of the unforgiving Soviet winter. Hitler, still clinging to the illusion of victory, bet on the Luftwaffe to keep his men supplied. But planes don't conquer snowstorms, and they certainly don't work miracles when airfields are under constant Soviet assault. The result? The skies fell silent, and silence turned into starvation. Cornered, General Paulus watched his soldiers wither away. Rations were cut to the bare minimum. Men died frozen in the trenches or collapsed from exhaustion before even firing a shot. The hope of an organized retreat became a bitter joke among the officers. And Hitler? No permission was granted. No rescue. Just empty orders sent from a warm bunker far from the front lines. It was like watching a ship sink while the captain shouted that the voyage was still on track. Chaos took over. Diseases spread, bodies piled up, morale evaporated with every freezing night. There were reports of soldiers roasting boot leather to trick their stomachs. Despair took on a physical form, visible in the faces of those still alive. Radios kept transmitting, but the messages sounded increasingly surreal. Orders to hold on, promises of reinforcements, lies dressed up as hope. But the truth was plain. The war inside was already lost. It was only a matter of time before it was official, and that official demise came in the form of ruin. The German defensive lines began to give way. Some tried to flee, others surrendered, silently. Paulus, who Hitler had promoted to field marshal the day before the surrender, a cynical gesture, since no German field marshal had ever been captured alive, decided not to waste the last lives remaining. On January 31st, he was captured. On February 2, 1943, what was left of the German army in the city surrendered. February 2nd, 1943, wasn't just another page turned in history. It was the sound of an empire beginning to crumble. With the surrender at Stalingrad, Nazi Germany suffered its first crushing defeat in Europe. And it wasn't just any defeat. It was public, humiliating, symbolic. Even the Allied newspapers celebrated as if they'd just won a world championship. Hitler, who always posed as an infallible strategist, saw his image shatter before the world. And the worst part? He knew that the game had now turned. The Eastern Front, which once seemed like open ground for Nazi expansion, became a minefield of resistance. The previously offensive German army was now beginning to retreat. It was like a boxer who's taken a heavy punch and lost his footing. The German war machine, which once seemed invincible, was beginning to stall. Nazi generals knew if they lost at Stalingrad, they could lose anywhere. The myth of German supremacy was thrown to the ground and trampled by the soldiers of the Red Army. For Stalin, it was more than a military victory. It was the crowning of Soviet power. The troops' morale skyrocketed. The population, once utterly drained, now saw a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The ruined city transformed into a symbol of resistance and rebirth. Stalingrad, covered in debris, rose like a phoenix in the midst of war. And the message was clear. The Soviet Union would not be defeated, not now, not there, and never again in the same way. For the Germans, however, the momentum they had before Stalingrad was never the same again. The war began to change colors, direction, and tone. Every subsequent Soviet victory seemed to echo that frozen winter of 1943. It was as if Stalingrad had given the USSR a new identity and the world a new path to follow. From that point on, there was no doubt. The Third Reich had a shelf life, and it was already numbered. And if you think this was just another chapter in World War II, wait until you see how this turning point influenced everything that came after. From the Soviet advance all the way to Berlin, to the very reshaping of Europe. But before that, we need to take a step back and carefully look at what made this battle so unique from the very start. And now that you've walked with me through every step of this insane battle, from Hitler's unchecked ambition to the suffocating encirclement that became Stalingrad, tell me, how can you not see just how arrogance, ego, and a thirst for control can lead even the most powerful empires to ruin? What happened there was more than a military turnaround. It was a practical lesson in strategy, resistance, and above all, in humanity. How many times in life do we insist on controlling everything when in reality we're surrounded by bad decisions silently piling up? How many personal battles do you keep fighting without realizing that maybe you're on the wrong side of the trench? Perhaps today is the perfect moment to pause, reflect, and counterattack intelligently, just as the Soviets did at the exact moment they needed to. So tell me, what impacted you the most about this story? The brutality, the strategic twist, or the simple realization that even the strongest can fall when they ignore their own limits? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. Let's exchange ideas, learn together, and spark reflections that go far beyond the history books. And of course, if you enjoyed this journey through the most brutal battlefield of World War II, don't forget, Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell so you don't miss any content, and share with everyone who loves history just as much as you do. The war may be over, but the lessons, those continue to echo to this day.